Hello again, Disruptive Technologists. Hassan here. Today we're speaking with Rebecca Costa. Rebecca is an American sociobiologist and futurist. She's the author of multiple books, including the international bestseller, The Watchman's Rattle, A Radical New Theory of Collapse, and On the Verge, which topped the Amazon New Business Release list as a #1 seller. When she's not writing, she consults with organizations looking to build fast adapting, innovative cultures, and speaking at Fortune 500 companies, universities, governments, nonprofit organizations. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Of course. So tell us about your career journey. How did you get to running a marketing firm to eventually becoming a futurist?
Well, that's a very good question. When you talk to anyone my age and they give you this wonderful bio of how they, became who they became, in my case, a leading expert on fast adaptation in high failure rate, complex environments. That's already a mouthful, right? My dad said, don't ever say that at a cocktail party. People will begin moving away from you. And I think he got that right. Actually, he taught me how to assimilate quite well. This is a little bit of an aside, but he said, I noticed that you like to talk a lot about science and technology, and you have to understand this was like in the 70s and 80s, and he said everybody's not on board with what you're talking about. So my suggestion to you is, if you see a group of good-looking boys and you'd like to get to know them, walk up and immediately say, how about that game? And don't worry about what the game was. They'll chime right in and you'll be one of the group. And it was kind of a funny introduction of realizing that I was on a different path than everyone else. And not only that, there weren't any women engineers and physicists and scientists that were working in Silicon Valley at the time. So I appeared differently. And also, I'm half Japanese. And this was at a time when the Japanese were dumping semiconductors and lowering the price and almost putting companies like giants today, like Intel, out of business. And so there was a lot of racism, actually, against the Japanese during that period of time. So you have to understand that racially, I didn't fit in. Gender-wise, I didn't fit in. I was interested in science, engineering, and mathematics, and that didn't really fit in. And so I adopted my father's philosophy of how about that game? Because I felt assimilation, it was really important. And I didn't realize at that time how really important and instructive my father had been, because you cannot have any change without critical mass. So there were two things that drove my career decisions. And it's very important, as I said before, when you talk to anybody and it makes it sound like they made all these decisions that got them where they are today, that's really not what happens. What happens is fortune favors the prepared mind. This is really key. If you are prepared, if you know your stuff and you're an expert, and you really dig in and grasp the fundamentals and get really good at your craft, then the fact that you might look different, sound different, it's overcome, because necessity eliminates bias. If people need you and they need what you can do and how you think and what you can provide, they can't afford the luxury of discrimination. And I discovered this very early on. I needed to be prepared to be the best in the room. And if I was in the best of the room, they really had to overlook my gender, my race. They had to overlook a lot of things. And so fortune favors the prepared mind was sort of my motto. And if you talk to anybody who has become extraordinary in their field, what happens is they became prepared and then they bumped into opportunities. It wasn't as though they made a plan and they executed the plan. They met someone here who knew someone there. They had a car accident and actually ran into the person who became their employer. I mean, life unfolds. But here's the good news. life unfolds, you have a general direction of what you would like to do, what makes you passionate. And then as you bump into these opportunities, you take full advantage of them. And that's what builds a career. In reality, that's what builds a career, not some planned out methodical thing that goes on. So I think younger people that might be listening today are going, gosh, I go to the left, I go to the right, I seem to be moving forward, but not in a straight line. I'm more like zigzagging, and it doesn't seem organized. And then you look at Rebecca, she's a global expert, right? And people, heads of nations call on her. How did she get there? Well, I did the same zigzagging. It's just that I made sure that I was prepared to take full advantage and leverage every opportunity. And that's the only advice I can give anyone. That and luck.
Yeah. Can you take us to one of those key moments where your preparation met the opportunity that shifted your trajectory?
Yeah, I can give you an example. In Silicon Valley was a relatively small and tight group. And, at the time I was single and I owned my own house and I had money in the bank, and all I could think about was I just wanted to travel the world. And, I wanted to just spend time in the Amazon because I was interested in biology, and that was sort of that in the Galapagos Islands where I wanted to spend my time. And I remember running into a man who was dating my best friend from college. And he said, I'm having a problem. We've developed this new technology and I'm having a problem interpreting it in a way that people could understand why they need it. It turns out it was the first CAD/CAM systems. And yes, they did need it. I mean, we had, prior to CAD/CAM coming along, we had people with seas of drafting boards and rulers, drawing nuclear power plants. We have to understand what the state was. And he explained what they had. And he said, would you be able to take all this engineering data and put it into some data sheets? And I said, I think I could do that. I can translate it into English that doesn't dumb down, but expresses the benefit, right, of what you offer. Yeah. Because what people are willing to buy and what makes people change is to see a benefit, a direct benefit to them. They don't change because technology's cool. They don't change because you think it's a good idea for them to change. They change for two reasons. One, they see a personal benefit. Two, they see a group benefit. Or three, they see critical mass moving in that direction, because we are social organisms and we are influenced by our social group or our peer group. So at that particular time, he offered me more money than I'd ever made before to translate, and money is a great motivator. Yeah. And I said, sure, I could do that. And then he gave me a check, and the bank actually cashed the check. And it was shocking to me, because prior to that, I'd been working at a grocery store to put myself through college. And here was a man that was handing me a check with several additional zeros to just interpret technical language. And so from there, I said, do you have any more of those jobs? Yeah. Again, fortune favors the prepared mind. I said, do you have any more of those jobs? And he says, dozens of them. And I said, I'll take them all.
Wow.
And right then and there, I was in the middle of Silicon Valley, and my value was to be able to take things that were very technical and translate those into what the benefits were. And I became a phenomenal tech writer. And from there, they moved me into marketing. And then I started studying and taking courses on product positioning and reading everything Peter Drucker had ever written. And, and I just immersed myself in seeing what that path would be like. Now, I had a background in sociobiology, so I had a bit of a leg up, because from an evolutionary standpoint, I know why people change. I know why people adapt or adopt new behaviors, and why they want new products, and why we habituate so quickly to novelty. So I had a bit of a leg up in that I knew human behavior. And so the natural transition for that, given human behavior and technology, was to use what I knew about adaptation and human nature and translate that into marketing. And that's how those two things came together. But again, not by design, by chance.
Hmm. Well, what's fast adaptation?
Fast adaptation is using 12 principles that we find in nature when the environment shifts very, very quickly, right? And there's no time for evolution to make those changes. You have to make behavioral changes to adapt to the environment. A good example is COVID-19, right? We could take COVID-19 is an environmental change that hits the whole world.
Yeah.
And so we have to move into speedy action because the problem is exponentiating. Our brains are designed to think in a linear fashion, right? We like to, that's what our brains have evolved to do. We don't really understand exponentiation well. And so we have a tendency to always think we have more time than we do. And that's dangerous, as we've seen with COVID-19. We made the mistake, as we always do, of thinking we have more time than we do. We're making that mistake with climate change. We're making that mistake with national debt. We kind of go along with the subprime mortgage fiasco, the dot-com crash, the sudden overnight collapse of a currency. All of these disasters are similar in that we don't hit the stop button quite soon enough because we think of these problems in a linear way. When COVID-19 hit us, we had to adapt very, very quickly. So, I have an entire list I could read you of what our response was here in the United States, and it's daunting. There are like 80 ways that we responded, from closing the airports to the paycheck protection plan to, advising people to wash, shelter in place, wash hands, wear masks, the Production Act that was enacted that made everybody switch over to making ventilators. All these things, we did them all en masse and within a very, very short amount of time. And so what you find in fast adaptation is, in critical situations, you find two things occur which trigger fast adaptation. Complexity goes up, and the amount of real data you have that's relevant to making a decision goes down. And this is the way to think about these critical opportunities. Is when COVID hit, complexity went way up. We didn't, think about it. The velocity of the change, the urgency of the decision-making, new demands, new stakeholders. I mean, all of this goes up suddenly overnight. And then the historical data wasn't that relevant. It sort of was in the scientific community relative to SARS and avian flu and the spread of AIDS. But this was a new virus we were dealing with. And it had not only jumped from human to, from animal to human. It's very rare in science for a virus to jump from an animal to a human and then be transmittable from a human to a human without that animal intermediary. Thankfully, that doesn't happen very often. And so we really didn't have our arms around how this was working. Why did it go from an animal to a human and then a human to human? And so, we really didn't have our arms around it. But the point is that the complexity of the situation went up. We had economic issues, we had health issues, we had cultural issues, and we had political issues, and then we had the amount of real data to make a decision going down, despite the urgency. In a situation like that, where you're looking at fast adaptation in an urgent, critical situation, you cannot call what remedies will work. What you have to do is place many small bets with clear triage. So in other words, you'll pursue vaccines, which are a long shot, high risk, big expense, but you'll also pursue hydroxychloroquine for a short amount of time, and then you go, it doesn't work. Bail on hydroxy, keep going on the vaccines, keep going on plasma, convalescent plasma therapy. You have to kind of hit lots of programs. You had payroll protection program, you had SBA special loans for businesses, you had the stimulus program. You know, you were kind of hitting all these different dials economically. There were 10 different economic programs that were out there. Some of them we're going to find out worked really well for people. Some of them probably not that well. You know, we accrued a lot of debt and they really didn't do anything. So we're going to find that out. And in real time, it's very important to have real-time data that allows you to bail on some and not bail on others. In other words, it turns us into a venture capitalist where we're making lots of small bets and we're saying, all right, we're going to look at the real-time data, and some of them don't get second round funding. And another group don't get third round funding. But eventually we have, at the thin end of the funnel, we have a solution that works.
It's a fascinating approach. So I'm guessing this is sort of what your consulting work looks like, is placing those bets, all those like small bets across, and then going through those phases.
Yes, because large corporations, when you think about it, large corporations want to optimize their decision.
Yeah.
So when they come up against something, a complex environment, they try to drive to singularity. But any drive toward singularity is a drive toward extinction in nature. This is why we have lots of types of bees, fish, birds, so that when the environment changes, some will have what's required to be able to successfully adapt, and some won't make it, right? So we understand that concept in nature, but we don't always understand that as a society. We don't understand that you make lots of small bets, and that diversification, right, is the immunization against fast change. Now, we kind of understand it, but we don't always apply it. And here's the reason I'll say I think we kind of understand it. Because when we invest in Wall Street, our financial portfolio, there is a complex, high failure rate environment. And I know very few people that say, I'm going to take all my life savings and put it on one stock.
Right.
We don't do that. We diversify, right? Yeah. And as you get closer and closer to retirement and you need that money, you can't afford to lose it, you get even more diversified because it acts as a protective agent, right? So we understand it there on Wall Street, which is a complex high failure rate environment, but we don't apply those same principles always to an emergency like COVID-19, climate change, a nuclear threat, those kinds of things. We need to understand the model exists. We do understand diversification is a really key strategy in nature and in social systems that immunizes us against failure.
How do you work with your clients and incentivizing, and like, because you know what I'm hearing, what you're saying, it's like I'm looking at large corporations and I'm thinking of like, you know, the challenges of middle management, where you have like, you know, you're at the bottom, you're kind of moving up, and you're so concerned with your own like, you know, goals to meet, to move up the ladder, right? And so you've got these sort of conflicting interests where a lot of times from above, you know, there's directives that are trying to push these more innovative ideas. First, do you run into that sort of challenge? I might just be making that up.
No, you're not making it up. You know, I'm a sociobiologist and I was trained in evolutionary biology, and the prevailing thought, if you read Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene, and you read, you know, other evolutionary biologists' work, is that we're each competing against each other for a limited number of slots. And the higher up you move, the better the school choices, food choices, mate choices, everything improves for you. So we're all driving to the top of the pyramid. We all can't get there. So you might be thinking selfishly about your own career. But as Ed Wilson points out, there's a problem with that theory. And that problem is that we also act benevolently. Altruism doesn't fit into that theory. The soldier who sacrifices himself to save 4 or 5 kids that he's not genetically related to, right, and are complete strangers. we can't explain that. We can't explain altruism under that model. So what Ed Wilson discovered is that he discovered that we're not just trying to perpetuate our own genetic pool. We're not just designed to be individually selfish. We also look out for the group, the troop, right?
Yeah.
So there's a dual mission there. When you're setting your goals, it's very good for you to think about promoting yourself. That's good. That's healthy competition, and it's good for the troop. But not at the expense of the troop, right? Narcissism doesn't actually work. If it did, I'd become a narcissist.
Right.
It doesn't actually work, right? Because it's to the detriment of the health of the troop. In this case, your troop is your company or your organization, your nonprofit, whatever it is. So yes, you want to move up, but not at the expense of your group. Only if it's, and this is why I get back to fortune favors the prepared mind. Be an expert at what you are, and organically, the organization will promote you. If it's a healthy organization and isn't driven by politics, their need for you will force you upward.
Right. Brilliant. You've had a pretty extraordinary career path. You must have had some moments where you made choices or followed hunches in the face of doubt from others. If you did have moments like this, how did you deal with them? And how did you hold on to those ideas while others doubted you?
Well, I go to Carl Sagan for this, who was a big hero of mine when I was growing up. And he said, you must have skepticism and openness. And I was really confused by that. I said, how can I be skeptical of others' views of what I think to be true and very important? And then also open, right? So I needed to listen to other people's views on what I needed to do. I needed that openness, but I also needed to doubt that, right? Because I like to quote a lot of other smarter people than me. It makes me look smart, for one, but the second thing is that I acknowledge they are smarter than me. They have succinct ways of putting things that I could never come up with. And one person who might surprise you is Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali had some great phrases, not just about boxing, but about life and about career. And he had a phrase, and this phrase is one that really should stick with people. Impossible is an opinion, not a fact. When I would come in and I would say, I think we should try to look at the problem this way, or that we could develop something that looks like this. And people would say, that's impossible. I would look at them and I'd say, that is an opinion, not a fact. It may be a wrong opinion on your part, but let me go a little ways down the road to prove to you that it's an opinion, right? I'd like to get closer to the fact and away from the opinion. Would you be willing to fund me? Would you be willing to give me a little leeway to convince you? And I think that if to do otherwise is just to be arrogant. And arrogance, like narcissism, doesn't work. It's just not practical. So, you have to win people over. The best work is done when you get participation, willing participation and collaboration. And so, yes, there were moments where I had doubt about my own efficacy. And there were moments where others had doubt about me and I didn't have any doubt. But I always said to myself, let me go a little further down the road until I prove to myself or to others that this is not viable.
Thank you. Okay, I can go on asking you questions all day because you have such a fascinating mind, and it's amazing as to how thought through you are on all of your ideas. But the last thing I want to ask is, Is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners?
Yes, there is one thing I think is really, really important, and that is to remember that we were designed by nature to be super adapters, to habituate very, very quickly to change, and that has driven us to the top of the living pyramid. And we are also designed to be really good collaborators. So, and the reason for that is because when we faced a danger, perhaps a predator that was larger than any single individual could fend off, the group could fend that off. So we became troop-dwelling organisms, or eusocial in the biology world. We're a eusocial animal, and so this current quarantine over COVID-19 is very difficult for us because we are interdependent, and we were designed by nature to be interdependent. So I would say to people, you don't have to force collaboration. It's natural. And if you don't see collaboration happening, that's an unnatural environment, right? And you don't need to do very much to coax people back to behaving the way that nature intended us to.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for your time, Rebecca. This was an amazing conversation, and I think our listeners are going to get so much from this. So thank you.
Well, thank you for the work you're doing.